My old uncle came in when I was playing with my toy soldiers on the living room floor. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the curtains, casting long shadows over the tiny battlefield. I had carefully arranged. The soldiers stood frozen in formation, locked in an imaginary war that only I could control. I didn't hear him enter at first, but when I glanced up there, he was Uncle Frank, leaning against the door frame with that familiar amused expression on his weathered face. "Still at it, huh?" he said. His voice growly from years of smoking cigars. His eyes, the color of faded denim, twinkled as he stepped further into the room. "Looks like a serious battle going on there." I grinned and held up a little green soldier. "Yeah, the captain here is leading his troops into enemy territory." Uncle Frank chuckled and lowered himself into the old recliner, the chair groaning under his weight. He had always been a sturdy man with broad shoulders and hands that looked like they had known hard work. His hair, once a deep brown, was now streaked with gray, and his lined face carried stories I had only heard in bits and pieces. "Reminds me of when I was your age," he mused, watching me reposition. "My soldiers used to set up battles just like that, only we didn't have fancy plastic men back then. We used sticks and rocks." I paused, looking up at him with curiosity. "Really, you played war?" He nodded, a shadow passing over his face. "Yeah, but back then we didn't just play. We grew up hearing real war stories from the old folks. My granddad used to tell me about his time in World War I. Said he'd seen things no man should ever have to see." I leaned forward, forgetting my game for a moment. Uncle Frank had never talked much about family history before. "What kind of things?" He hesitated, rubbing his jaw, as if considering his words. "The kind that stick with you, the kind you don't forget no matter how many years pass." There was something in his voice that made me realize he wasn't just telling a story, he was remembering, and for the first time I wondered just how much he had seen in his own life. He took a deep breath, glancing at the tiny soldiers spread out before me. "I was about your age when my granddad first told me about the trenches. Said the mud would swallow a man whole if he wasn't careful, and the cold it got into your bones." He said it wasn't just about fighting the enemy, sometimes it was about surviving the night. I shivered at the thought. "That sounds awful." Uncle Frank nodded. "It was, and he told me something that stuck with me forever." He said, "War isn't like the games you play. It's not about who wins or loses, it's about the people, the ones who make it back, and the ones who don't." I glanced down at my toy soldiers, suddenly seeing them differently. Before they had just been little figures, pieces in a game I controlled, but now I imagine them as real people with lives, families, and stories of their own. Uncle Frank must have seen the change in my expression, because he smiled softly. "Didn't mean to ruin your game, kid. Just thought you should know that behind every battle there's more than just strategy. There's real courage, real sacrifice." I sat quietly for a moment, absorbing his words. "Did you ever?" I hesitated, then tried again. "Did you ever see a war?" For a long time he didn't answer. He simply looked at me, his eyes distant, as if he were seeing something far away. Then he nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I did." I didn't push him to say more, but something in the way he looked at me made me realize he had seen things I couldn't even imagine, and maybe, just maybe, that was why he had never talked about it before. He reached for the small wooden box he always carried in his coat pocket. I had seen it before, but never knew what was inside. This time he opened it. Inside there was a single old photograph. He handed it to me. I studied the faded image. A group of young men in uniforms stood together, their expressions a mix of determination and exhaustion. One of them was Uncle Frank, much younger, but unmistakable. "This was my unit," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Some of the best men I ever knew." I traced a finger over the faces in the picture. "What happened to them?" Uncle Frank took a deep breath before answering. "Some made it home, some didn't." I felt a lump form in my throat. "I'm sorry." He patted my shoulder. "That's life, kid, but remembering them, keeping their stories alive, that's what matters." I looked at my toy soldiers again. Before they had been nothing more than figures in a pretend war, but now I saw them differently. I saw them as people with stories, just like Uncle Frank's friends. I carefully picked up the captain and held him in my palm. "Maybe," I said, "I'll make sure my soldiers get to come home this time." Uncle Frank smiled, and I saw a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "That's a good idea, kid." That day I played differently. I still set up battles, still led my troops into the fight, but now I made sure they had a story. I made sure some of them got to go home, and every time Uncle Frank came to visit I asked him to tell me more, to share the stories of the men he had known, because stories mattered, and so did the people behind them.